Hello, Australia. Welcome to Mission Possible, the podcast that explores and celebrates the stories of immigrant entrepreneurs in Australia. I am your host, Mr. G, and today I am with an interesting guest and a business owner. His name is Jess Landry. He is originally from Canada, and he came to Australia following a dream. Today, Jess is a mixed martial arts expert and runs his own martial arts studio in Newcastle. Welcome to the show, Jess. Thank you for accepting my invitation to Mission Possible. And I would love to know a little bit more about your business and about yourself. What's your story here and what brought you to Australia, to Newcastle?
Sure, you're more than welcome, and thank you for having me, Philippe. First of all, to kick that all off. My story effectively is I'm from a town in Canada called Calgary, and I was raised in Vancouver till I was 10. Moved to Calgary and lived there through all my formative years until I was 22. And about a week after I turned 22, decided to come over and move to Australia. My mother is the only person who is Australian in my family because my father was an agricultural pilot. And so he found a job over here in Australia working for a gentleman named Joe Bilkey Peterson, who was one of the, I think he's the longest serving premier of Queensland. And so my mother happened to be born over here. They ended up going back to Canada where the rest of my aunts and family were born. But through my mother being born over here, I got citizenship through descent effectively. So because my mom was here. I really wasn't doing too much with myself in my early 20s, but I had started training in martial arts. And so when I decided that I was going to move to Australia, I just saved up some funds, processed my passport, and effectively became an Australian overnight before I'd even landed in this country, which is odd enough in and of itself. But I didn't really have a place to go. So that was kind of the issue. I knew I was going to go there, but I didn't really have a destination in hand. So as I said, I've been training martial arts for a couple of years now. And at the time, we're talking about 2003, 2004, there was an organization called the Ultimate Fighting Championship, which was pretty underground at that point in time. It's obviously very, very big now with names like Conor McGregor and Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey in the past. But there was the name of a gentleman named Elvis Sinisic, and he was at the time the first and only Australian who was fighting in the UFC at that point in time. So back then you could get these events on VHS from your Blockbuster Video and that sort of thing. And that's how I became acquainted with them. And so I sent through an email over to them. And at the time, the gym was called SPMA that he had run in partnership with another gentleman named Anthony Parosh, who later on will go to become my primary coach and instructor. And they said that they were based in the suburbs of Sydney. And so because I didn't have a particular destination in mind and I had no plans on if and what I was going to do when I got to Australia, finding the gym and signing up for it and continuing martial arts training over in Australia became my primary motivation of how I then ended up in Sydney.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, amazing. And how did you come to Newcastle after?
Well, that's a separate story. So we were in Sydney for about a decade. Then we went and did our working holiday visa with my girlfriend, who would then become my wife, and I got sponsored for a brief period over there. And we returned to Sydney in I want to say about late 2014. And so we wanted to buy something larger, and as probably like a lot of people are going through right now, in particular in Australia and virtually all Western countries at the moment, there's an issue with the price of housing and housing supply. So as I was already a business owner, so I've been running my own sort of corporate PR and media business for close to a decade. And that presents its own issues generally with getting lending when you're a small business or a business owner when it comes to the banks. So we obviously wanted to get into something larger. And as I was explaining to you before we hit record, we were looking at the Central Coast originally, but the Central Coast really has sort of one arterial road that goes in and out of it. And it's a bunch of, towns or hamlets that build it up. So as it gets busier, it really gets congested in there. So we began to look at Newcastle, and we spent about 6 months on weekends driving up and going down, checking out open houses before we decided to put in an offer and ended up over in this place in Cardiff, which literally straddles the border of Newcastle and Lake Macquarie.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So what motivates you to put your own martial arts studio?
Look, it's an interesting thing. it came about by happenstance, effectively. So when I moved up here, I ended up getting the opportunity to teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a separate martial arts studio. And after a few years, they opted not to continue the program underneath me. So I got left with about 10 guys, and we had just finished some renovations over at my house. So we began training over there. It was because that's the space that we had, effectively. That's all that
Yeah.
came about it. And so, when you get left with a group of guys, you're given the choice of whether you just carry on with what you have, and martial arts generally has a high rate of attrition. It's generally a hard activity to do, and generally you're not always getting injured, but occasionally that can happen. So
Yeah.
over time people begin to drop off. So you have to make a decision of whether or not you're going to try to grow this and bring new people into the team to keep it consistent and add new people, or over a certain period of time, whether that's 6 months, a year, or 2 years, that team is going to stagnate if you're not bringing in new blood to it. And that's just the fact that any sort of social or extracurricular activity is, by its definition, something that you do outside of what you must do in your life. So it begins taking second or third place to other things. So when it's no longer a priority, you end up losing people. So you must be looking to attract new people into your team or center to keep it going.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
the problem with it is that by its nature, it's more difficult than other extracurricular activities, like a reading club or a beer softball league or something like that. Because at the end of the day, when you participate in an activity like this, the goal is to learn how to defend yourself, and that means punching, kicking, and choking other people. So there's sort of an agreement that you have in place with other people when you're participating in this. And in addition to that, when you bring in new people, a lot of people think that this is something that they want to do. And occasionally, they're kind of hit with the reality of what it is that we do. And it's not necessarily as attractive to them anymore once they've actually had a taste for it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. How was your integration process from Canada to Australia? Is there anything, because they're both English speaker countries. Well, Canada, you have French as well, but
We do.
you're from an English background, right? Is there anything that was different from Canada when you arrived?
No, and I can appreciate this question because you and I had the opportunity to talk about sort of your culture shock and issues with integrating. But I'm very lucky in terms of, as you identified, I already come from a Western nation. We speak English, and we're also part of the Commonwealth. So my integration into this environment wasn't difficult by any means. And the other thing is, as I mentioned to you at the outset, I had a place to go. So once I knew that I was going to be joining up with Elvis and Anthony over here, those first years, we're referring to this gym I began training at, which was called SPMA in the suburbs of Concord in Sydney. All of us, and we still keep in contact. That's what's fascinating about this. We're talking about this gym, that started up over 20 years ago, and about 20-year period, there's still about 20, maybe 25 of us that still reflect on this period in our lives of sort of being, in our early to late 20s, and how, for a lot of us that represents one of the greatest periods in our lives, because mixed martial arts was not as blown up as it was anymore. So the gym had a passionate group of supporters who were interested in this sport and learning how to do jiu-jitsu and kickboxing. They were there regularly because this took precedent over the other sports that they had. So you had a really incredibly good culture and people that wanted to be there. And a lot of us still, we communicate through social media and reminisce about those memories. So I guess what's different about that is when I came and landed over here, I didn't feel like I was lost or homeless because I had a destination to go to daily, which was to train. And through that training is where I ended up meeting my social circle. As well, because there was no language barrier, and I'm Anglo-Saxon white like a lot of the other people were there wasn't really any sort of cultural barriers to break down. And so the other thing, anyone that participates in sports, I guess possibly a lot like military in a lot of regard, is when you're doing a sport where you're really giving your all against somebody else, there's there's a great deal of respect that you have between people because, even as I tell my guys now, and for the most part, we teach people how to fight, but it's not like we're in here hurting each other every day. But when you do martial arts and when you learn how to do it, the agreement is if I am allowed to punch, kick, and choke you, you are allowed to do that to me too. And that can escalate things pretty quickly. So you begin to kind of really get an idea of what people are made of internally, and when they're willing to kind of turn that up against you, that there's a great deal of respect that's given, because you have to go in and you see these people on a semi-regular basis, and you're competing with them at a level where you're putting it on each other. So you'll often find it's fighting and traditional martial arts they represent different cultures, but when you're a regular in a gym, you don't need to be boastful to be considered dangerous, because you know where you fit in that hierarchy of people who train in that gym immediately when you're doing this sort of activity. It's a different sort of, make and iron. So I'm diverting away from your point, but effectively what I was saying is I didn't really have that many issues because I looked like everyone, I sounded a little bit different, and I had a place to go daily, which I think for a lot of immigrants that come over here is it's sort of the perception of what they see of Australia on a television. And then when they get over here, as I said, maybe they have trouble finding a group or community to fit into. And I think that's really for anyone coming over or undertaking a new activity, whether it's immigration or travel or business or friendship groups, you need to find some sort of like group that you can involve yourself with, that shares passions, identity, and culture, so that you can find a place to integrate with.
Yeah, it's great. It's great that you mentioned that, because it's important to find your tribe when you come here. Sometimes, you're in large cities, like I came to Melbourne, and it was hard to find my tribe because I didn't know where to look. Then, I came in 2003. So then, when I started using social media, probably in 2006, 2007, then I started to find, my Chilean or South American community. But before, it was pretty tough. It's great that you mentioned that, because some people, get lost, and, depending where you go, like now I am in Lake Macquarie, there's no South Americans, or many South Americans here. But I have another group of people, and, I am in a different stage of my life, and, I have neighbors and I have friends from school, and that's great. How do you think your business are helping in the local community? What sort of values your business brings to the community?
Look, the offer of martial arts and its training has never really changed for, I don't know, a millennia, I suppose you can say. There's really sort of two parts to this question. The first part, and this is what really seems to be forgotten in modern society, and we've really lost this, and I think that's why so many people are depressed and feeling lost. In your life, you really need sort of three things. You need a job that is fulfilling, where you hopefully you don't define your whole character through that, but allows you to have some level of pride in what you do. You need to have a reason to wake up in the morning, and obviously that reason needs to provide enough income that allows you to live. Secondly, you need family, and you need a third spot, which is a club or a group or social activity. And for so many people these days, oftentimes they're missing number two and number three. They might have number one, and oftentimes number one is a job that they hate. So first of all, they've got to wake up every morning because they know they've got to pay the bills, but they are going somewhere where they hate, where they detest, or, they've got bad management or people that work above or generally above, pushing down on them. Secondly, because we have all these electronic devices now, we have social media, Netflix, we're not required to go outside anymore. And now that we're not required to go outside anymore, we're not meeting anyone. So, in society, there's a combination of a lot of people that have no relationship with a partner to go home to. They're going home to themselves, or we've got this really disposable culture now where you potential partners, you swipe on a phone to determine whether or not they're feasible, as opposed to taking the time to get to know them. So relationships seem to tick over a lot more. I mean, going back 30 years, you would find someone, if you liked them, you would date them for a period of time, and then you would marry them, and then you would have kids. And that was it. That was the process through and through. Now we've got people that are in their 50s still trying to find the one when, you're the average age is 80 years old. So there's a problem there.
Yeah.
And then the third thing about that is you need to have somewhere else where you can find mateship effectively and do an activity that relieves all your stress. So martial arts can provide that. If it's not martial arts, it could be a cooking club. It could be a book club. It could be recreational soccer. You need those three things in your life. You need to have a job that gives you purpose, that can pay the bills. You need to have some sort of family unit, ideally. And third, you need to find that other activity where you go to burn off, the stress of the other two that they inevitably cause in your day-to-day life. Now, in terms of what martial arts actually provides to the community, it does a lot of things. We're not the only martial arts studio. I mean, you have a lot of choices in this nowadays, and that's also something that's changed quite drastically. If you and I are roughly about the same age, so I'm sure I remember watching things like the Karate Kid. You don't talk back to your sensei or something like that. But generally speaking, that sort of attitude is not prevalent anymore because everything is based on customer service and you have technology at your hand. So if you don't like what you're doing here or doing something here, you just go virtually across the street or a couple kilometers down the road and do something else. So in my opinion, training in martial arts has actually changed quite a lot as well, because people are looking for it to be a social activity as opposed to a physical activity. And so when I got involved in it, 20 plus years ago, and I grew up playing sports, it was mandatory to do your push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and all that sort of activity, which a lot of people complain about now because it's too hard. So you're trying to offer something to the community. It's something that's honest, but you have to be receptive to them because they have more choices available to them of what they want to do. But the offer of martial arts has never changed, which is the idea of developing self-confidence. It's funny. You can never tell who's going to walk through your door and who's going to stay and who's going to go. It's still an anomaly. You have people that are very, very boastful, that think that they're tough or think that they can do it. And after a few weeks, when they realize, as I said, where they fall in that pecking order, they're not willing to do the work to bring it up. And then you have really silent people who you would think that you're surprised that they would even take the step into the gym. And mentally, at some point, something's bothered them so much that they're willing to go through the pain of whatever it was to come out the other side and be stronger. So that's really what the offer of martial arts is. It's building confidence. It's learning to build resilience, because you're solving physical problems when you participate in this. If someone's kicking you, you got to learn how to deal with that. If someone's punching you, you got to figure out a solution to that. Otherwise, it's going to continue to happen. In a lot of respects, they talk about it like chess, and I very much think that it is in that regard once you get to the higher levels of playing this game. And it provides all the other activities. So fitness, you want to get in shape, you want to look good. Participating in physical activity reduces stress as well, which is something, a lot of people aren't as physical as they used to be. So there's a lot of there's a lot of things that it can do, but in terms of its offering to the community, I'd say that probably hasn't changed in a 1,000+ years of actually doing martial arts.
Yeah, interesting. What's your target market, and how do you adapt your business to cater to the needs of your customer base, of the local customer base?
Newcastle's probably a pretty good place to have something like a martial arts studio. Sydney as well, but again, they're different cities. Sydney is closer to Melbourne. I'd say Newcastle is more of its own thing, and what I mean by that, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. Newcastle still has a lot more blue collar type workers and tradies. So the idea of more hard physical work is not unknown to them. So they're more, in my opinion, having come up here comparatively down there, they're more receptive to doing the hard yards required to get good at this, as opposed to just coming in and wanting to push their hands around and think that they're badasses, for lack of a better term. But traditionally, and again, not always, but for a lot of martial arts schools, is the model has been built on servicing kids. So you teach kids how to do this, and that's generally where most people get their signups, and that sort of activity is for children to do the activity. And then somewhere generally, again, not always, but generally around the age of 10, you start losing them to soccer, and then a few years later you lose them to rugby league. So there seems to be this sort of general process where a lot of parents will get their kids involved in martial arts to make them think that they're looking after themselves. Then around 10, they get involved in more team-based sports. But we've not had to go down that route, as we do two primary martial arts, which is Muay Thai kickboxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and we link it together with wrestling. And so that tends to attract more late teens and people that are turning 18 into their early 20s. So in terms of our gym, a little bit of a different demographic, where you would say our demographic is typically from 16 up to 23, somewhere in that neighborhood, because this is when testosterone hits and all these boys who are becoming men want to learn how to fight, and they watch it on television. They know the UFC product really, really well, and they want to learn how to do that.
Yeah, cool. And how do you market it?
At the moment, we haven't had to market it too hard at the moment. So, and this goes into a little bit of IP of what we're going to need to do to grow as we look to move into a larger space. So I won't get into too much of our secrets of what we need to do for other people that are listening out there, but a lot of this becomes word of mouth. So generally, when you get one person in the door, if they're happy with the training, they will invite family members, brothers, sisters, cousins, friends down for that. And oftentimes they'll give it a try. They'll fall off, but their recommendation might bring you one or two more people in. So there's still a lot of word of mouth in this sort of industry and activity. And again, the rest is just social media. People have to know that you are out there. As I said, for a lot of people that are new to this sport, they might know that they want to do martial arts to learn to get healthier and to get fit, but a lot of people might not actually know what martial art they want to do. So for a certain percentage of people, they don't care whether they're doing MMA, Taekwondo, Aikido, karate, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It doesn't matter to them. They just recognize that I put on a gi and then I go exercise and I learn how to, potentially defend myself. There are not a lot of MMA schools in Newcastle, so that is probably more of our defining part. And what I mean by that is that when you think about martial arts, again, you probably think about, the white gi, a lot of bowing, a lot of kya, all that sort of thing. That's not really what we do. We are more on the other side of it, which is sport. Boxing, kickboxing, UFC. So it's not that the respect isn't there, but it's just we don't have the theoretical involved in our martial art. And what I mean by that is we're not talking about how you would potentially or theoretically deal with a situation or multiple attackers. We are putting gloves and shin guards on and mouth guards and groin guards, and we are going out and punching and kicking each other. How hard we do that to each other then becomes based on experience. So for anyone listening going, oh, that sounds a bit rough, possibly, but if you're new to it, no one's, you're not going to come into our gym and then be hurt so much that you can't come back the next day. But as I said, this is not theoretical. So you have to learn to develop skills. And as you skill up, there are natural challenges in this, just like a video game. You have to complete level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6, level 7, level 8. And all those levels get more difficult as you progress. And what that means is putting more and more experienced people in front of you that know how to, really fight or take care of themselves. And when you do a martial art like this, you really begin to learn who you are, because you're putting real challenges in front of you, and whether or not you're willing to deal with that. Because as I said, our intention isn't to hurt each other, but there are certain days when you get partnered up with someone and you go, well, it's a 3 or 5 minute round, and I'm not coming out of this for the better, so I've got to survive this to get through. And you really begin to learn a lot about yourself when you do an activity.
Yeah, right. Self-knowledge. Yeah, right. Yeah, interesting. Do you have to be accredited to be an instructor?
No, it's still very, very Wild West. No, you do not. So I've got I've got 2 black belts. I've got one in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and one in Muay Thai kickboxing. So for
Yeah.
anyone that's listening to this, Muay Thai kickboxing does not have a belt ranking system, but the gym that I went to had a shirt-based system to create knowledge and equivalency in that level. So I've been doing this for 20 years, and I started Muay Thai kickboxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in tandem back in Canada, and have continued through that process, and have had amateur and professional competitions and coached for about 5 years. And now we've been open ourselves for about 5 years, but there's still not a UNSW degree or PhD or Master of Sport certificate that you get for doing this sort of activity. Credentials in this sort of, or if you're asking about certification in this sort of sport, come more around things like first aid, general coaching, all that sort of activity. But no, you will see people. You will see people that might have only been training for 2 years that go out and open their own school. Doesn't mean that they can create good cultures or anything. I'm not saying that, but generally someone's looking for something that's a little bit more experienced. I think what's been proven when you ask about certifications and that sort of activity, though, is the first UFC event happened in 1993, and this is what I always talk about people who practice our martial arts. And when we talk about this, and when I say our martial arts, what I'm talking really about is mixed martial arts, which is really a discipline, broadly speaking, of Muay Thai, wrestling, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You can bolt on other sports, boxing, judo, sambo in particular is especially good, but we're talking about MMA is the culmination of this activity into a sport. Okay, so it's the apex, I guess, of what you can do. So when the first UFC started, its defining characteristic was literally to take different martial arts and pit them against each other to find out what was the most effective. And that's what I mean. From the very first event, it was designed to remove the theoretical from it, to say there's no more talk of if I do this and he does that, then I do this. They said, well, go prove it. And they put them in without gloves and no time limits and let them fight it out. And so by that, it's very organic. That's the thing, that despite the fact how violent it sounds, there's truth in it, effectively, is what I'm saying, because you're putting it on a platform for everyone to see. So what ended up happening in the early years is the grapplers dominated because fights would inevitably go to the ground. So if you spent 20 years doing Taekwondo or karate without learning how to fight on the ground, you were out of your element. Then you had a wave of wrestlers coming in, actual Olympic caliber wrestlers who would be in the Olympic Games, who could take anyone down and then just pound them out on the ground. Over time, the strikers got really good by avoiding going to the ground. But this is what I mean. You can have any discipline of martial arts, but once you bring it into there, you're allowed to fight standing, you're allowed to knee and elbow, you're allowed to keep fighting on the ground, you're allowed to submit. It's really like a blank canvas in terms of what you can do with that martial art. So when you're asking about credentials, what I mean, as I take this question back to what you're talking about, there are a lot of martial arts studios, and they will, you will just do your kata and you will swing and you will do this, and then they will go, you are a killer. And it's like, well, maybe, but we're doing a lot of realistic based sparring every day to kind of find out where you're at. And as I said, once you do that, you build up a team with people. You really know where you are in the order of that. So, I'm not saying this to overwhelm anybody, but it's just trying to, I'm trying to think of an adapt description. It takes a lot of years to become, maybe a culinary chef, but anyone can, put some meat between a slice of bread with some mayo and mustard and call themselves a cook, I suppose you can say.
Yeah. Interesting, man. Do you have any personal success story with your business that you can share with us?
Oh, look, as I said, I continue to run a business media outlet and corporate PR company. I mean, we hit 10 years, which I guess is a milestone for a small business
Yeah,
that does this
yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
activity. But I wear a very different hat in that because we're speaking mostly with Australian corporates. So that's much more of a suit and tie sort of activity. In terms of what we're doing with our martial arts studio, so as I mentioned to you, this sort of came about by happenstance. There wasn't any grand plan to open up a studio and turn it into something. We just effectively a group of us kind of got left on our own after they closed our program down. So after about a year and a half, I suppose to say what I can say what we're particularly good at is out of any martial arts studio in the Newcastle and Lake Macquarie region, some that have been in existence for 30 plus years, or ours, the Newcastle Mixed Martial Arts brand. As far as I can tell, we are now the third highest rated Google martial arts studio in the combination of the entire Hunter region. So you've got gyms that have been open for 5, 7, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30 plus years. And we now rank number 3 against them at the moment. And obviously that's an organic thing and that will change. But, once we decided that we were going to do this with my team, I guess that's the benefit of having done this for so long is a lot of people know me historically and are able to vouch for the activity along with the new guys that we're bringing in. And while we're offering probably a program that's available, we think we're doing things a little bit different over here. And as I said, it's your culture and your team matters. Having that third place is really important. So I think we've done a very, very good job of inviting and welcoming new people into our gym and overcoming that fear that when they come in to train or learn this activity, that they're going to be hurt or harmed, which is generally the number one thing that people are worried about, right? So it's no different to a boxing gym. You might want to go learn how to box, but the idea of walking through the doors of a boxing gym is going to be very, very intimidating because
Yeah,
ultimately what the purpose of the activity is, which means
yeah,
when you walk through those doors, the peers in that room are going to be boxers. It's not,
yeah, yeah.
it's a different thing. So I think we've done a very good job of, not eliminating that because that will always be there, but helping people to understand that you're welcome through our doors. We want you part of our team and we're not going to take advantage of you. You will be built up, but there will be challenges along the way.
Yeah, okay. Did you look for any sort of support to start a business, or how did you afford to have your own studio?
Yeah, that's again, it's a great question. And I'll come back to my point because, as I said, none
Yeah,
of this was pre-planned. This was happenstance that evolved organically. So, as I said,
yeah,
I was coaching a program that got shut down under my instruction, and I got left with about 10 guys approximately. So
yeah, yeah,
we had finished some renovations in my house. So we just padded up the whole area because, again, you need to work in a padded area. We're slamming everyone down. And then as I said, I said, well, we've got 2 things that we can do. The 10 of us or myself, 11, can just keep working together. And as people fall off, we can just let this die out, or we can try to attract new people so that we can bring new people and have more partners and train with. And everyone said, we want to keep doing this with you. We'll go down that path. So that led to the creation of a brand, a website, the Google reviews page. So it all came out of thin air effectively over time. But in terms of help to establish this, as I said, I've been in Sydney and I've been doing this for about 20 years now. So there are a lot of people that I know in the Sydney area, including my primary instructors by the name of Anthony Parosh, Elvis, Larry, and a whole bunch of other people that have been running gyms for 20 years, and guys that I have trained with who have also gone out and run their gyms. So as I said, even if we haven't, not outside of my coaches, but for peers that I used to train with, even if we haven't seen each other in 10 years, there's an extreme camaraderie between people
yeah,
that you spent years fighting with in a gym
yeah.
or help prepare for fights and stuff. So when you
Mm.
reach out to them, they're more than willing to provide you with assistance and help. And so like anything, before I went into a business, I spoke with 7, 8, or 9 of them for across multiple calls to find out, what are the big issues I'm going to face when I move in? What are the things I need to know? What are the gaps? How much money am I going to lose going into this? Because like any business, there's cost to set up, there's cost to outfit. You might need staff. There's a certain amount of money that you're going to lose right off the bat. So the question becomes, how long am I going to hemorrhage money for? And what steps can I take to stop that process, to take me out of the red and move me into the black and then become profitable? It's no different to any business. But I'm lucky, as I said, 20 years of doing this, I was even able to reach out and speak to my instructors back in Calgary, more than 20 years. Because again, we're still connected. A lot of people will do this sport for maybe 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years and then drop out. So you know who the lifers are, I guess, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, okay. How long did it take you to get the turnover that you needed in your new studio?
Oh, look, it wasn't bad. I was lucky that the student intake supports almost half the rent right off the bat. And then you just do, you do some social marketing, which there's an outlay of cash in that. And then everything turns around gradually. And then just like any business or, maybe similar to a restaurant or something, word of mouth begins to pass around and people begin to find out who you are. And so, I'm very pleased and proud to say that we have had people come through our doors who, they don't want to trial it or they don't want to do anything. They just go, we've heard about you guys and we want to sign up and work with you, which is a very pleasing thing to have people come off the street who you've never met before asking for you, and something that even in my other business that I run is not something that we encounter very often. So it's a cool and a privileged position, and it's it's unique because, as I said, I've only been in Newcastle for about 5.5 years, coming up from Sydney. So while I'm very happy to be here and call myself a Novocastrian, I think you'll find a lot of the locals would not define me such in probably the same way that you've noticed yourself. But I'm very pleased to have that opportunity and to know that at least in our circle, our name is getting out there.
Yeah, amazing. What does success mean to you as an immigrant entrepreneur? As an entrepreneur, how do you measure it? How do you imagine the future of your business in the next 5-10 years?
So I think probably for all of us when we were growing up, we thought success was just having a lot of money. If you've got a lot of money, you are successful. But there's a few things that I guess I've learned in that space, and effectively, and I tell my guys this in training as well, everything is a trade-off. Everything that you do in life is a trade-off effectively for your time. So if you want to be successful at something, you've got to invest a lot of time. When you invest a lot of time, you'll make a lot of money off of it. So again, not always. People have a lot of different career choices available to them. But if you are, an entrepreneur or CEO of a company, I'm assuming you're probably going to be working 14, 16-hour days. So, you might be getting $1 million or multi-million-dollar salaries, but that certainly doesn't leave a lot of time for your wife and kids, if that's what you have. So you might be successful financially, but again, what you tend to hear in these stories of people that have wealth is they've got gigantic houses, gigantic boats, gigantic cars, but they can't use any of them because they are working every day and they're working weekends. And not always, but oftentimes they have poor relationships with their family because all their kids want is for their dad or mom to be around and they're not there. So I'm not judging that situation, but what I'm trying to say is everything in life is a trade-off. So similar to what we do, it's like if I throw a punch, I might receive one back. I might receive a kick. It might land cleanly. There's a multitude of things that can come into this. So when you define success to me is that trade-off to be able to have free time, which is really what most people don't have. So if you can be developing an income and have enough money to allow yourself to survive, that's combined with having free time, I would say that's a success. Now, over the last two, sort of COVID and COVID beyond, we're going through a very, very interesting time because there was a study that said for most people, if they make $100,000 or more, it doesn't matter how much more beyond $100,000 they make, their level of happiness generally won't increase. So once people know that their bills and mortgage are taken care of and that they're able to put a little bit of money away, once they're able to do that, it doesn't matter how much more. Their level of happiness won't increase. So that's why you oftentimes hear about people, it's like a lot of people don't want to do jobs for 12, 14, 16 hours a day. Once they hit a certain amount, they want to be able to enjoy that free time, because that's really what's limited. Everyone has the same amount of free time. We don't all have the same amount of money, but unless you're very, very ill or something, we all have the same amount of time of what we can do in a day. What's different about going into a martial arts studio like this is that I don't have a lot of time anymore, because generally your busiest hours are in the evening when people are finishing work or finishing school. So as I've gotten into this, I actually have less free time. But in terms of success, again, as you get older, and you'll notice this in the corporate world too, is that people will make a lot of money, and then sometime maybe in their 40s, they go, what am I really doing with my life? I'm earning all this money, but am I making a change? Am I actually doing something with my time? Because people recognize there's only a certain amount of time that you have in your life. And so then it sort of becomes based more on creating value and giving back. And I think that's what I've really found about transitioning into, and why I'm enjoying it so much. Yes, I'm giving up a substantial more of my time, but it's incredibly rewarding to teach other people and to watch them sort of develop into something while you create friendships with them. And so it's a new way of looking at work and business that I hadn't had before when I was working more in a corporate environment, because they're very different environments. In a corporate environment, everyone has a persona that they're trying to fit and identify to, and and everything that you do with them is very transactional. Where when people are moving into something that they're trying to do as a hobby or learn to better themselves, you're discovering the real them, and you're helping them on whatever sort of journey that they're choosing to go down, and you begin to develop really I was going to say intimate, maybe that's not the right word, but strong relationships with these people, because you're finding out about them as a person, you're skilling them up, and then you're testing those skills to find out what they're really made of inside, their character, of whether or not they are willing to deal with confrontation. And our confrontation is effectively sparring, fighting, and effectively some level of controlled violence, as you'd say. And so it's incredibly rewarding to do, and especially when you're able to work with people who are coming in because maybe things aren't going too well for them in their regular life. There's people have a range of different motivations to come in and do this activity, but for a certain amount of people, they might already be feeling very, very beaten down with their normal life. So the idea of having to take a few more of those beats to overcome that adversity is not a problem to them. And seeing people sort of adapt and come out of their shell to do that is it's very, very personally rewarding. So I guess, as I said, I think when we start, we initially define success as money. Then as we get a little bit older, we define it as time. And then possibly when we go into the next thing, it's about creating value or defining purpose, I think is maybe how you might go through these phases through your life. Now, in terms of what that means for us, you're asking, where do we see ourselves? Well, I don't have an answer for you at this point. I think it's too early on the journey. I mean, I could sit here and say, oh, we want to build a 3-story compound where we've got 400 people in here training every night. I don't really think that's honest or accurate to say where we'll be. Obviously, you want to make this profitable. You want to be able to create a leadership team up with you that allows you to step away from the business a couple days a week in some respects, so I can give my family the time that they deserve. And then, of course, to grow it in some capacity. So as you get older, you want to make sure that you're making enough money to be able to contribute to your super and have to look some investments. I probably would say that path doesn't change for anyone. It's just a little bit more difficult for your typical small business owner.
Interesting, man. Interesting. I think there is a lot of coaching, like personal coaching on that martial art business as well. So, mental strength, self-knowledge. I see a lot of aspects of self-development
Very much so. So, effectively, so it's the reason why athletics are so important when you're a young kid. So I know that there are intellectuals and there are jocks. I'm well aware of how
Yeah.
those two schools of thoughts work. But athletics do a few things for you as a kid. So first of all, it builds coordination. And again, I'm not a scientist or anything, but that has something to do with like the right and left lobes in your brain and getting those two things to work together, which I'm assuming has more educational benefits down the line when your left and right brain can talk to each other. So all those elements of coordination when you see really awkward kids, so getting them to do activities. But the other thing is that when you do athletics is hard. It doesn't have to be martial arts. It can be track and field. I'm Canadian. It can be ice hockey. It can be basketball. It can be any activity that you choose. But effectively, as you train, everything is difficult. If you've never done a push-up before, one push-up is difficult. If I can only do 5 push-ups is difficult. If I can do 50 push-ups, 52 push-ups becomes difficult. There's just constantly a new barrier of difficulty that you're trying to break through at every time. So it doesn't really matter what that activity is. So as I said, like if we relate this into our studio, if we're talking about sparring or actively working with each other, if we have someone new come into the gym, I'm obviously not going to hurt that person. But conceptually, even the idea of getting them to put on gloves and stand in front of me and agree that we're going to kind of slap each other with gloves is a very confronting thing to someone that's never done it before. You've got to break through that barrier. Then after you break through that barrier, once they get comfortable using their hands, we start integrating our legs. Your legs are longer. They're heavier tools. They can do more damage. So somebody thought that they were relatively good using their hands is now having their legs kicked out of them. Again, I don't mean to address this in terms of, as I said, like beating people up, but there is always a new barrier to confront and then overcome. They're two separate things. Two very, very separate things, because you can run up to the barrier and then run away. So actually I've got this book right here. Probably my favorite fighter ever was a gentleman by the name of Randy Couture, and it was what was really interesting about him is he said, I'm scared to get into the I'm scared to fight. The difference between people that achieve these things and people that don't is that just because we're scared to do it doesn't mean that we go out and don't do it. Mike Tyson talked about the same thing all the time. He said he was terrified to fight, but you just go out there, you give no expression, and you just go out there and do what you got to do. And so when you do an activity like athletics, as I said, you're constantly confronted with a barrier, and then you've got to get over that every day. If you do a sport 3 times a week, generally speaking, 3 times a week, you are dealt multiple problems that you have to walk up to and then get over. Because everyone knows there are many days when you wake up and you're like, I don't want to exercise or do this at all. And you go, well, the deal is I have to. I don't have to be good if I choose to go down to the gym. I don't have to try to do a maximum, but I am forcing myself to do it. And so in a lot of sports, when they retire, not only because of their profile. So again, if you play a sport and get some sort of level of notoriety, you're going to be known. So people want to work with you anyway. But beyond that, for a lot of people that have excelled athletically from a young age and through, is they go on to do very, very well at business because they don't really accept failure as an option. They're willing to confront that barrier and go through it to achieve some level of success, because for a long period of time, that's all they knew. And I think the two go hand in hand. And so, as I said, a lot of that, the attrition rate in martial arts is very, very high because there's a lot of barriers you got to confront, and a lot of people don't want to do that. And so what we do is quite a bit different to what much more traditional martial arts tend to do.
Yeah, amazing. Do you well, how would you communicate self-control to kids that they really want to do it, they really they're all pumped up and they want to kick someone? How do you cultivate self-control in the mindset of these guys?
Can I get you to expand on that? I'm not entirely sure what you're asking.
Sure. Sometimes when I was a kid, I did some martial arts, right? And sometimes I felt that, I just wanted to get into a. No, I wasn't. I was more like a pacifist, but I saw some people that really wanted to confront me. I was basically, because I was a little bit bigger, I was the one that people want to try with.
Yes.
They want to try with me.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I don't really want to get into a fight with you. And I usually, I had to defend myself, even though I didn't want to fight, because kids, some kids. I mean, I'm talking about the 80s, the 90s.
Yes.
Some
Very
some
different time
kids, they
periods as
really
well. Yeah.
different time period. Different time period. They really want to fight someone. And you see nowadays, you go to a not that I go to nightclubs, but you see in the news, people that are, fighting out of the nightclubs, and they kill each other with one punch. How do you? How do
So
you?
if I'm hearing you correctly, how
Yeah,
do we address violence in on the streets or in our everyday lives? Is that kind of what you're asking me?
that's right. Yeah, but yeah. With your students, how do you educate them so they manage themselves and have self-control?
Okay. That's not a problem. It's really not an issue that we face. And generally speaking, not always, generally speaking, it's not an issue that I faced at any of the gyms that we go to. So, and what I mean, again, how do I word this? As I said, once you get punched in the face, like really punched in the face, you understand what that feels like. Okay. So, working in these environments as well is you really begin to find out that you have no idea. Again, I think the perception of this to the outside world is that if you came into our gym, everyone looks like some hulking bodybuilder. Okay, that is not the case at all. What I'm saying is, like, Philippe, if you, again, if no one knows any context, theoretically in our gym, you might be the deadliest guy in there. Now, when I look at you on the camera with your nice olive collared shirt and black sunnies, that would not strike me as such in any way, shape, or form. So when our guys begin to train in here, you begin to really, really understand that when you look at somebody out on the street, you have no concept of what they do or don't know, because their body type and the way that they look is not by any means indicative of their skill level. Okay. So there's a few things that come into this. So when people come in here, obviously it's something that you need to learn first. This is something that takes at least a year to get moderately good at, which means when new people are coming in, if this is something that they want to do, it doesn't take them long to figure out how bad they are at this, because everyone thinks that they can fight. Okay. Everyone thinks if I got really upset, I could take this guy. We're now providing an environment for you to try that out. And you're going to start to see when you punch, kick, and try to do things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a whole nother thing in and of itself, how bad you really are at this. Okay. So it's, again, I'm Canadian. All right. So let me relate this back to myself. Okay. It's sort of like you watching ice hockey and saying, oh, I could go beat these guys. And the first question I have for you is, well, can you skate? Do you know how to ice skate? I'm assuming not.
No,
right?
I'm not.
No.
Yeah.
So when we hear people say like, oh, I just get mad and then I go out and kick some guy's ass, or I know how to fight. When you come into these environments, you get a very good idea of who knows what they're doing, how long it takes to get competent at this skill level. Then the other thing with it is that once you get competent at this, you begin to understand what you are capable of doing to other people. Okay. And so as I mentioned, when we practice this sport, we have a fully padded room. The floor is padded. The walls are padded. We're wearing mouth guards, groin guards, gloves, shin guards, so that we can, as safely as possible, punch and kick each other. as safely as possible.
Yeah.
Once we
Yeah.
start stripping that stuff off, we're talking about bare knuckle fights where if you hit somebody hard and they land, they don't have anything soft to land on. So this is it's not very well known by people, but in street fight, the reason why when people get king hit, like the big right hand in street fights, and why some people die in the street, it's not from the initial hit. The initial hit knocks somebody out. That's what turns the lights off and puts you to sleep. It's when they fall down, it's when their head hits the concrete that causes internal bleeding on the brain that kills people. It's that secondary hit of landing on concrete. So, not to make this sound, incredibly dangerous, because we're obviously not hitting each other that hard just when we're playing around and practicing, but we are trying to create the safest environment to participate in this sport for all of our participants so that they can come back and do it again on Wednesday and then on Friday and potentially on Saturday again. And I think this is sort of the misunderstanding of when we do this. It is impossible to go as hard as you want every day because everybody would end up injured all the time. And then you would have no one to play with. This is really, in order to do this sport, you need a partner to play with. So if you're constantly injuring each other, it's impossible to do. So once you begin to understand the damage that you could theoretically do, you start to, because you've seen it practicing with other people in the gym, is that you begin to get an awareness of what that might mean to you in the real life. So as I said, it's like one clean hit, and that person hits their head on the concrete. Outside of potentially murdering someone, you're now talking about the police, lawyers, litigation, criminal charges. So we look at this stuff very, very realistically. And the other thing about it is, like, for our guys, if we're actively participating in this sport, I have no motivation to go beat up on somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, because tomorrow I get to come back in here and play again. And then if I'm in here 3 days a week, putting all that effort into this, I really have, there's nothing for me. I've already dumped all my adrenaline and effort already while I'm in the gym. And that's the point of doing this, is like within an hour in and out of that gym, you want to be physically exhausted. That's kind of the goal of what you're going for. So you come in here and you dump all that effort and all that strain from your daily life into the pads or into your sparring and everything, and you go back to your regular everyday life. So I don't think we face that. And that's also a culture problem as well. And what I meant by that is, as I said, when we welcome anyone through the door and we will work with you to your level. So we tend not to attract those sorts of people from the beginning. And if we do happen to get them, we make them well known that they're not welcome to train here. This is not, this isn't a dream vacation where you're just allowed to hurt everybody at will. That's not how you build a team or develop any of this. So I understand what you're saying, and it's very well known that when people are drinking and doing stuff, they go after the big guy because they're looking to test themselves. That's not a very unknown thing. Yes. But in saying that, all I can say to that is it's what you are talking about is addressing another situation of the value that martial arts can provide, because everyone should be doing this so that you are competent at looking after yourself should a situation arise. It's very similar to, outside of all the health and physical benefits and having camaraderie and having a team, it's more like having a fire alarm in your house. You hope that you don't need it, but if a fire breaks out, you want to have that alarm on there to warn everyone to get to safety. That's really what, and as you said, times have changed now because, fights still break out, but generally speaking, having fisticuffs isn't as common as it might used to be. People might use more weapons and that sort of thing, or try to hurt people economically or through social media. So it's probably not considered as necessary anymore. But the fact of the matter is, outside of all the community, friendship, mateship, camaraderie, and the health benefits and self-confidence, this should be considered necessary just for your own personal well-being, the same way that someone should learn how to swim. I don't intend to drown anytime, but you learn to swim so that you can go to the beach. right? It's I think they kind of
Yeah.
go hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Amazing, man. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jess. Has been a great conversation. I know you're busy. So, I thank you so much for this opportunity. And I hope your business is continue to be successful and we can meet at some stage in person.
Absolutely, that won't be a problem at all. And thank you.
That would be great. Thank you.